Alright guys, welcome back to the channel again. We got another video to go over. By special request, a few times over actually, I had people ask questions about electrical components, wiring in particular, and things like that. So this is probably going to be a 1, a 2, a 3, maybe even a 27-part video. I don't know yet because there is so much to cover when it comes to wiring. My first disclaimer is I am not a professional. And having said that, I think that there is a right way, there is a wrong way, and there is a way that works. And I think you can apply that to most anything on a race car. And I think I have a special guest behind me, maybe even two. Hey, you guys go inside. So anyways, we're going to cover a few things that I like to use and a few ways I like to do things, and I'll show you why I don't do them other ways. So without further ado, let's get into the wiring portion. Okay guys, so one of the things that I wanted to show you real quick was zip ties. We have all fallen victim to getting scratched up when you're working in the engine bay of your car or your buddy's car, or you're at the track and you're in a hurry, or whatever the case may be. So I have professionally prepared a couple of zip ties here, and I'm going to show you the way that most of us cut them off in a hurry. You grab the closest thing that cuts, right? And you reach up there and you cut the thing. Now what you are left with, and hopefully you can see that, is that little doodad. What you're left with is that little doodad right there. Now, I don't know how many of us have done this. Well, I do. All of us have done this. You run that thing across the bottom of your arm when you're reaching in to grab something, and it will scratch the ever-loving shit out of you. So, how do you get rid of that? There's a couple of ways. First way is you use the right kind of tool. That little dude right there is made for cutting zip ties. Okay, maybe it's not, but that's what I say it's used for. And I'm here to tell you that it makes a gigantic difference. It will cut that zip tie perfectly flush, and you will never ever scratch your arm on that. Now, if you do not own a set of these, the quickest, easiest, bestest way to do this is to take your handy little torch and you hit that thing a couple times like that, and it will knock the sharp corner off of it. Now if you want to take that one step further, you can hit it a little bit and tap it down like that, and that'll round the edges of it, and it's not near as sharp as it is if you just fresh cut it. Alright, we're done with that. Time to go to the next part. Okay guys, tip number 2 and tip number 3 are going to be intertwined with each other, no pun intended. Okay, so I have just a plain old piece of 10 gauge wire that I dug out of the toolbox, or out of the wire box, and I want to show you the difference between good quality wire and wire that's not good for anything. So that's going to be the tip number 2. The tip number 3 is how you cut that wire. Okay, these particular wire cutters you can get at any of the big box stores that carry Milwaukee. But I will say this brand or this style works awesome. The main reason I like them is because the cutter and the stripper is in the front of the pliers, and you don't have to put the wire in here to strip it or cut it. So I'm going to strip this wire and cut it so it has good square ends on it. And I'll show you where the good quality wire portion of this tip comes into play. So you're going to take this wire and strip it back a good fair amount, just to make it easy to twist together, because this is, like I said, this is 10 gauge wire, so it's a little bit stout. Alright, twist the ends of it real good, and then we're going to put a piece of this shrink wrap on it also. Now this is one piece of wire and it's going to make a loop, but that's okay because this is just for demo. So twist this thing together as good as you can. And again, 10 gauge wire, a little stout, no big deal. Now, one thing that I like to do, and we could even call this tip number 4. So this is going to be 2, 3, and 4 all in one. Okay. One thing that I like to do is, you can see I leave these little wings on here. That is by design. So I'm going to put this stuff in the vise and hold it up just like that. I'm going to switch to my better torch. So there's nothing to it. I'm just going to solder this together real quick. Heat it up right in the middle. Get the wire itself hot before you apply solder to it. Now, one more time, this is 10 gauge wire, and it takes a fair amount of heat to get this thing to melt solder. In fact, I'm going to turn the heat up. Alright. Get the solder flowing real good. Good amount of solder on there, and no big drips sticking out of the bottom. Now, I would not grab it at this point, but hey, I'm a glutton for punishment, so let's do it. Now, one thing that you want to watch out for, especially it usually happens when you're doing big wire, is you can see that solder joint looks perfect, right? And then you flip it over, and there's no solder sticking out the back side. So, on the bigger stuff, sometimes you just gotta flip the wire over and add some on the back. And actually, looking at it now, I see some coming through there. So we'll warm it up a little bit. Now this one may fall apart because it's upside down. All right, so we got solder on both sides of that joint. And you see the big drip there at the bottom. There's two ways you can take care of that. Since this solder is soft metal, you can use your flush cut cutters, and you can just take that bubble of solder and nip it right off of there, and no problem at all. So what you want to watch out for is the wings. I didn't leave quite big enough wings, if you will, but normally I like to take those and cut them back. And you can cut them at an angle in which they won't pierce your shrink tubing. I really should have had my glasses on for that. Okay, so now you can see that guy right there sticking out good. We'll take that and trim him back. Again, this is copper and solder, so it's really soft. These pliers are not made to cut steel of any kind. So that's that. We have a perfect solder joint. Again, I hate to have to say this a million times. Not the right way, it's not the wrong way, it's a way that works. It works good. Now, the reason why I use this wire in particular is, I don't know if you can see it real good in the camera, but the wire's melted back right here and right here. That's why you don't use standard auto parts store wire on something that really, really matters, like the race car back here. Now, we're just applying normal old shrink tube, right? Right. There is a little bit of difference in this stuff, so we'll take it. We're gonna warm it up good. Okay. Now I'm intentionally warming this up a little more than normal just to illustrate a point. Alright, right here you can see the glue sticking out from under that shrink tube. This particular shrink tube has glue lined on the inside of it, so that when you heat it up, the glue melts and it seals off the ends of it perfectly. So that is why I like to use that particular kind of shrink wrap. Now if you look a little closer, this dude right here, you see the burn marks on the wire? Okay. That is because this is not good quality wire. And when I say good quality, I mean AXL or GXL wire. So I'm going to do the exact same thing on a piece of AXL wire and show you the difference. Okay, so rather than do the exact same thing and solder that GXL wire like I did the other stuff, The soldering portion of it's going to be the same, with the exception of how it melts the plastic back. So I want to show you what this looks like when you apply fire straight to the wire. This one is the GXL wire. This one is your standard parts store wire. So check this out. Let me get these far enough apart so you can really see. Now I'm going to apply the torch from the camera view so you can really see. You see instantly the parts store wire burns, and I'm not going to grab it with my hands, but you can almost scrape the covering off of it. And the GXL wire, as you can see, it's just got some ash on it. So that alone is reason enough to use GXL wire or AXL wire. The difference between AXL and GXL is the ability, or the heat protective ability of the covering that's on the wire. So again, this is your parts store wire, and it's hard to see on camera, but I can actually twist the covering of the wire probably 3/4 of an inch, maybe an inch back from the end that I heated up. This GXL wire right here, wherever the cooked end of it is, yeah, this one right here, it's still exactly the way it was when I heated it up, or before I heated it up. All right, so we've covered the flush cut pliers like we use for zip ties, even clipping some small wires and things like that. The kind of strippers that I like to use, the strippers, not strippers at the club strippers, but wire strippers. There's a couple of different ones that I have and I use for different purposes. I bought these on Amazon not too long ago. They work great. They're small and they fit in tight places. The reason I don't use them the most is because the cut and the strip portion is under the hinge of the pliers, and that's kind of a pain. It has the really good crimpers that I like though. So there's a trade-off for everything. Now, speaking of crimpers, we're going to move on to the section of crimping versus soldering. If you ever want to have a debate, tell somebody that you like crimping versus soldering, or that you like soldering versus crimping. You will break the internet. The internet will literally fall apart for that moment in time. But we will go over some crimp fittings just because, and why or how to crimp them. Okay, so we just stripped this wire back. No big deal. Strip it back like you normally would, and we're going to use that style of crimp connector, okay? Or butt splice. There you go, butt splice. Stick it on the wire. Now this is hands down the best kind of crimper you are going to get to use any kind of crimp connection like this. Now make sure and use the correct one, and there's a trick to this. It's kind of hard to tell on the butt splice connectors, but I will show you anyways. Alright. Now you'll see that's pretty stout. Now if you look close, you see one has the indention. Oh, actually they both do. It's kind of not really the same though. Does that make sense? There's a male indention here, there's a female indention here, and what I mean by that, if you look at the pliers, they have a point, or a male side here and a female side on the other side. Now, why that matters is because there's a seam that runs down this the barrel of this butt connector. Now, when you crimp this thing, if you pay attention to where that seam is, you don't want to put the seam on the male side of this. Reason being is that male side will pierce the plastic and it will split the seam wide open on there. Now that's kind of well, it's kind of picking the fly shit out of pepper. But if you want to do it right, and you have to use these kind of connectors, then that is the way to do it. So using this kind of butt connector is the last resort. I don't use these. Matter of fact, I haven't used one in years. I just had to dig through my junk box to get one of these out. Now, this is the newest thing, and these are actually shrink connections. So crimp it the same way, and these, I don't think they have a sleeve or a split in the sleeve. So what you got to watch out for, or what you don't want to do, is you don't want to pierce the plastic if at all possible. Just give it a good squeeze, put the other wire in, repeat the process. That. Now you have a good solid crimp, and now you're gonna make it even better since they are shrink wrap, and warm it up just the same. Now the way you can tell when these things are completely done is they'll be shiny. Now I'm here to tell you, that thing right there, there is no breaking that thing apart. So the one thing that you do have to watch out for is, I got after these a little bit too much, and you can split the plastic right there, and I think you could see that there's a hole poked in it right there. So that's the one thing you got to watch out for. Make sure that you use the right size crimp fitting here to keep from doing that. Okay, so the next part is not for the budget oriented. Actually, a lot of this probably isn't, because the AXL and GXL wire is kind of expensive compared to the cheap stuff anyways. However, so like I said, this particular part is really not budget oriented, but if you want to do things as close to right or as close to perfect as you possibly can as far as wiring in your race car, or even in your regular car that you may be putting stereo stuff in, or who knows what, the best thing that you can do is the doot, however you say it, connectors, like that right there. And those doodads are probably as good as you could possibly get. Now, the pin, or the kits themselves, are expensive. The Canon style plugs use the same pins. These go anywhere from, I've seen $80 to over $100 a pair just for the plug itself. That's really not even that bad. The bad part comes when you have to buy those. The name brand pliers, and I mentioned this in another video, these crimpers are about $200. The name brand ones are about $300. There is not a dime's difference between them, and they're about $150 too much. But I'll show you something interesting. So first off, you set the wire gauge here for the kind of wire and connector that you're using. So now this particular stuff I'm going to show you is 20 gauge. So you'll see it's set on 20 gauge. Now this is the stop. So when you're using a certain kind of pin, then you set the stop where the pin sits in here at the right height compared to where the teeth crimp the pin. Okay, so there's a couple ways you can do it. Now I already got the wire stripped back, and this thing is supposed to go in there about, I think they said 20 thousandths gap from the base of the pin to the covering of the wire, and I think I got this one pretty close. Can't see it for nothing. Oh, I had it. Alright, so that gap's a little wide, probably 60 thousandths, but it'll work for what we're doing. So I've cycled the pliers a little bit so you can see the teeth inside of there, and hopefully you can see that. So this particular crimper will not let you open them back up. You actually have to complete the crimp cycle. So I'll go all the way down, and then it opens back up. Take the wire, put it all the way inside until the pin touches the green stop. And I'm going to stop it so you can see. I'm going to try to do this in the view of the camera. So there it is. And also notice how easy they are to crimp. and there it is, all done. And there is the complete crimp, and I'm here to tell you those little dudes are stout. As you can see, I've already slid the covering back and didn't even pull the pin off. And you're not going to pull the pin off. That is a really, really tight fit. Now, I'm not going to put the pin in there because they're an animal to get back out, and this is a new plug and all that good stuff. So, in my opinion, that is the absolute best way to wire a car for removable devices or things like that, which you're going to see in another video when I finish wiring the engine bay of the race car. So, those are just a few tips, and I probably lost count in there somewhere, but that is how I do things in regards to wiring on the car. I know there's some guys out there that are probably just cringing because I use a torch to solder with, but when you have AXL or GXL wire, you don't have to really worry about burning the covering back or anything like that. And if you've done it a few times, then you can be pretty proficient at it, and you don't have to worry about a soldering iron and all that kind of junk, especially when you're working around the car, you know, having a cord and all that. So anyways, that's just some of the things I like to use when wiring. So kind of a lengthy, wordy video. If you've made it this long, please give it a thumbs up, share, like, subscribe, and comment down below. Thanks, guys. We'll see you in the next video.